She told me my flagpole and my metal sign were ruining neighborhood harmony. And a week later, 3 HOA goons cut through my gate with bolt cutters like they were breaking into a storage unit. The funny part is they strutted in wearing fake IDs and neon vests acting like the law. And they still didn't realize they'd picked the one guy in town who could smell a forged document from across the street. I never thought a fresh coat of paint and a new gate would start a war with a homeowners association I didn't even belong to. But that's exactly what happened. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, you already know how this goes. Somebody gets a little power, they start confusing suggestions with authority, and suddenly you're the villain because you didn't ask permission to exist. It was a Friday morning at my fabrication yard outside Reno, the kind of morning where the air still has that cool edge to it and the machines haven't warmed up yet, the whole place quiet except for the faint hum of the office lights and the distant clink of metal settling. We'd just wrapped a 6-month modernization of the front bay. New security gates, pressure-washed concrete that actually looked like concrete again, and a polished aluminum sign with our shop name mounted clean and centered over the roll-up door. The last touch was simple 25 feet of American flag on a pole near the front fence, classic and straightforward, the kind of thing you don't even think twice about because why would you? I was proud of it, I'll admit that. Not in a show-off way. More like you work your tail off for years. You finally make the place look like the business you've built. And for 1 second you let yourself enjoy it. I'm in the office going over invoices with Sandra, my lead office manager, when the front gate intercom chirps. Just that little beep was weird because deliveries and pickups usually use the side lot. Truckers don't like that tight turn off the main road, and neither do I. I walked over, glanced at the monitor, and saw a woman I didn't recognize standing outside the gate. Cream blazer, sunglasses pushed up into a bleach blonde bob posture like she owned the sidewalk. 2 people stood with her, one clutching a clipboard, the other holding a tablet, both of them wearing the kind of "I'm here to report you" face you usually only see on school hall monitors and people who send emails with too many exclamation points. She tapped the button again, then stared right into the camera like she wanted the lens to feel intimidated. Sandra leaned over my shoulder and whispered, "Please tell me that's not what I think it is." I hit the intercom. "You've reached the property owner. What can I do for you?" The woman smiled, and it wasn't friendly. It was that smooth, practiced smile like a wolf dressed in linen. "This is Nancy Greaves," she said, president of the Summit Groves Homeowners Association. "We need to speak with the property owner about urgent compliance concerns." I actually paused because my brain needed a second to catch up. Compliance? With what? This is an industrial yard. Welders, forklifts, steel stock, real work, real noise, real zoning. I said, "I am the property owner, and this is a secured industrial site. You can explain through the gate." Her smile stayed in place, but I saw her jaw tighten just a hair. "Very well," she said, like she was doing me a favor. "We've received numerous complaints from our community regarding the visual impact of your recent renovations. The oversized signage, the flagpole, the reflective materials, all of it violates our aesthetic harmony covenant." I stared at the screen, then at Sandra, then back at the screen again, like maybe I'd misheard the words aesthetic harmony covenant coming out of a grown adult's mouth. Nancy kept going like this was the most normal conversation in the world. "We're here to initiate the onboarding process for your property into our HOA so we can work together to bring it into compliance." I blinked. "You want me to join your HOA?" "Correct," she said, all bright and confident. "Given the proximity of your facility to our community's eastern frontage, it falls within what we call the extended visual envelope. Any structures visible from Summit Groves are subject to review and alignment with HOA guidelines." I let out this slow, tired breath, the kind you do when you realize you're about to lose an hour of your life to nonsense. "Lady," I said, "this yard isn't part of your subdivision. It's been industrial land since the 90s. I've got a grandfathered zoning exemption on file with the county from 1997. You don't get to walk up and retroactively regulate my shop because you don't like polished aluminum." Nancy took a controlled breath. Then the clipboard guy handed her a trifold packet like they'd rehearsed it. "This outlines our voluntary annexation process," she said, holding it up to the camera as if that made it real. "Several properties adjacent to Summit Groves have already agreed to enter into association partnership. You'd retain full ownership and operations, of course, but we would assist with architectural standards, approved landscaping plans." I cut her off. "Let me stop you right there. I don't need help with landscaping. I don't need your paint palettes. And I definitely don't need a suburban committee deciding what my shop sign should look like." Her voice cooled. "Mr. Rowe, I urge you to reconsider. Our association has invested significantly in preserving property values for our residents. Your facility is highly visible to our main residential entrance. Without visual harmony, those values can suffer. Surely you understand. And that was the moment it clicked for me like a lock snapping shut. This wasn't a neighborly request. This wasn't concern. This was pressure, wrapped in polite words delivered with a smile. I said, I understand extortion with manners when I see it. That finally cracked her calm. Her nostrils flared just slightly, then she forced the smile again. We'll leave you with the packet, she said flatly. We strongly encourage you to comply. If we don't hear from you by the end of the month, the board may need to take further steps. I leaned into the intercom. I won't be joining your HOA. Not now, not ever. And if anyone steps 1 foot on this property without legal authority, I'll have them arrested. Nancy lifted her eyebrows like she was offended I'd used a grown-up tone. That's disappointing, she said. But noted. They walked back to their SUV, double-parked halfway across my gravel approach like the laws of physics didn't apply to them, and drove off. Sandra came out a minute later, picked up the packet hanging from the gate, and flipped it open with 2 fingers like it might be contagious. This looks like a cult brochure, she muttered. We laughed because sometimes laughing is all you can do when something is so ridiculous it shouldn't exist. We tossed it on the break room table and went back to work, and I honestly thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A few days later, I'm in Las Vegas for a supplier expo Monday morning just after 8. I've got burnt hotel coffee in my hand. I'm talking stainless rates with a guy from San Diego, and my phone buzzes. Yard cam alert, South Bay entry. I tap it open without thinking, expecting to see a bird, maybe a tumbleweed tripping the sensor. Instead, the live feed loads and my stomach drops. 3 people in neon yellow vests are walking straight into my workshop. One has bolt cutters hanging from his belt. Another is stepping over my broken side gate like he does it every Tuesday. The third is holding up a phone, slowly panning across the bay like they're filming a home tour. For a second, I just froze, because your brain doesn't like accepting something that blunt. Then I start tapping through camera angles, my thumb suddenly slick. They aren't just snooping. One guy is marking boxes with a black marker. Actual tags on crates of precision-formed aluminum client components waiting for delivery. Another opens a utility locker and takes photos of the equipment inside like he's building a checklist. That sales rep is still talking, and I didn't even hang up properly. I just said, something's wrong, and walked away mid-sentence. I'm not proud of how fast my brain went cold, but it did. When you run a shop, you learn the difference between a mistake and a move. This was a move. I called Officer Raines, the sheriff's deputy who patrolled the outer industrial zones. I'd dealt with him before. Straight shooter, no drama. I told him I've got an active break-in on camera. They're inside my locked bay. It looks like they're impersonating inspectors. He said, stay on your way back. We're dispatching a unit now. 4 hours later, I'm back at my yard, and the place looks like someone took a bite out of it. The back gate is hanging half open, chain cut clean through. The side personnel door lock is snapped, strike plate torn right out of the frame. Inside, there are bright orange circles marked on half a dozen sealed crates like targets. Fingerprints on my lathe controls, photos taken of equipment that doesn't belong to them. It felt like an invasion, not just of space, of trust. Like somebody had walked into my house and moved my furniture around just to prove they could. Officer Raines is there under the overhang with his notebook open. He shakes my hand. Mr. Rowe, we've been trying to reach you. This one's unusual. No kidding, I said, and I could hear how tight my voice was. He pointed at the gate. We pulled a plate off your footage. It's registered to Summit Groves Homeowners Association. Vehicle's been used before by their community enforcement team. Enforcement, I repeated, because I wanted to make sure I'd heard him right. This isn't a cul-de-sac dispute about lawn gnomes. They broke into an industrial property. Raines nodded. I've already filed felony trespass and property damage. Question is, what were they thinking? Then he held up a folded paper and a plastic evidence sleeve. I looked at it and felt my blood pressure spike. It was titled something like Emergency Architectural Enforcement Notice with an embossed seal and a signature from a so-called county compliance inspector named John Hale. Here's the thing. Years ago, before I ran this shop full-time, I worked in occupational enforcement. I knew the local systems. I knew who was real and who wasn't, and I knew damn well there was no county inspector named John Hale. This is fake, I said, and I didn't even have to think. Raines watched my face. You sure? I'm sure, I said. That seal isn't even a county seal. It's their HOA logo run through a printer and pressed with a hobby embosser. We pulled up the footage together. One of the intruders' thinning hair Summit Groves ball cap works the lock like it's routine. No hesitation, no warrant, just trespass dressed up as authority. Raines sighed the way tired people sigh when they realize paperwork is about to become a mountain. I'm forwarding this to the county prosecutor, he said. There's no way this is a mistake. And that's when I stopped feeling shocked and started feeling angry. The clean kind of anger that makes you focused. I walked him through everything. Nancy at the gate. the annexation packet, the threats about further steps, the fake document. Rains flipped through that trifold brochure, frowning deeper with every page. They used this as justification, he said. Looks like it, I told him. They tried to scare me into joining, and when I didn't, they escalated. By that night, I'd uploaded the footage to a secure folder and made a call to the district attorney's office. I still had a few old contacts from my enforcement days, and the moment I said forged inspection order and industrial break-in, the tone on the other end changed fast. By the next morning, my property was flagged as an active crime scene. Yellow tape, a deputy taking photos. My scheduled maintenance crew turned away. I lost a full day of operations. And in this business, a full day isn't just annoying, it's money, it's deadlines, it's trust with clients. And while the criminal wheels were turning, Summit Groves tried to flip the story. Rains comes to me later, shaking his head. You're not going to believe this. They filed a complaint against you, said you threatened their safety and defamed their leadership. I stared at him. They broke into my shop. They're claiming your reaction was aggressive, he said. And he looked embarrassed, even repeating it. They included a copy of your industrial zone sign as evidence you're antagonizing them. I laughed, but it was the wrong kind of laugh. No humor, just disbelief. They're muddying the water, I said. They know they're exposed. Rains gave me the practical advice every cop gives when things get messy. Lawyer up. You poked a nest. That night I got an email from a local reporter asking for comment. Attached was a draft statement from the HOA painting me as some hostile outsider who refused reasonable visual standards and attacked a peaceful community. So I called the reporter and said it plain. They forged county credentials, I told her. They trespassed on industrial land they don't control. They vandalized my property. If they can do it to me, they'll do it to anyone. The story ran. And that's when Summit Groves went from ridiculous to dangerous because they didn't back down. They doubled down. A few days later, I get served. A process server walks into my reception area like it's a dentist appointment, drops a stack of papers on Sandra's desk and says, civil complaint. Summit Groves Homeowners Association versus my business. Defamation, emotional distress, reputational harm. One count with a phrase so dramatic I thought it was a joke, community destabilization. Sandra read that line out loud and went, is that a real thing or did they make it up like the inspector? I called an attorney that afternoon, Bryce Landon, a bulldog litigator with property law in his bones and zero patience for people like Nancy. We sat in his office while he skimmed the complaint, and I watched his face do that slow change from neutral to amused to annoyed. They're not trying to win, he said, tapping the paper. They're trying to outlast you, flood you with discovery, drag you through filings, make you pay so much in time and money you fold. I leaned back and said, problem is, they picked a fight with someone who knows how systems work. Bryce smiled like a man who enjoys a fair fight. Good. Then we don't play defense. We go straight to offense. That same day, we filed a counterclaim: harassment, attempted coercion, willful destruction of commercial property, falsification of legal documents, reputational damage. And Bryce did something smarter than anything I would have thought of in the moment. He sent a formal packet to the state attorney general's office with everything attached, and he requested a state-level review for systemic abuse. Basically, he treated them like what they were starting to look like, a racket. And here's where the story twists, because up until then it was just me versus Nancy and her little clipboard crew. And it could have stayed that way, a loud, expensive mess. But people talk. Victims watch. And when somebody finally stands up, others realize they're allowed to stand too. 2 days after that complaint went out, an older man showed up at my shop. Late 60s. Service jacket from a long-dead HVAC company. The kind of tired eyes you get from fighting battles alone. He introduced himself as Carl Meacham. I heard what happened to you, he said, and his voice was low like he didn't want the air to repeat it. Figured it might be time I spoke up. Carl owned a small workshop a couple blocks south of my yard. 2 years earlier, the HOA came to him with the same song, your building is unsightly, join voluntarily, or we escalate. Carl didn't have cameras. He didn't have lawyer friends. What he had was a heart condition, a shed full of tools, and not enough energy to fight. They came back with a fake code violation warning, threatened fines through some made-up compliance subcommittee, and Carl signed the membership agreement just to make the stress stop. Since then, he'd been paying dues to an association that never represented him, and they'd forced him to change his property to match their approved look. HOA gravel, HOA bushes, HOA control. I didn't think anyone would believe me, he said, and his hands shook a little. Not until I saw your footage on the news. Bryce had him sign an affidavit the same day. Then, the second surprise hit. A former HOA board member reached out through Bryce's office. Melissa Trant, former treasurer. When I met her, she looked like someone who'd been holding her breath for months. Late 30s, sharp eyes, nervous energy in her hands. "I can't believe I was part of this," she said quietly. "I didn't know how deep it went until it was too late." She brought documents, internal memos from Nancy, meeting minutes, emails, drafts of the fake inspection notice, expense logs showing HOA money spent on special visual audits that were really hired muscle in neon vests. One note referenced me directly, plain as day, something like, "If Raul refuses alignment, apply pressure. No one is above the image of Summit Groves." Bryce spread those papers across his desk like playing cards, and the room got very still. "They've been running this like an organized operation," he said, and he didn't smile this time. "Force, fraud, intimidation, using HOA infrastructure as cover." And that's the moment I felt it shift, from personal conflict to something bigger. Because it wasn't just my flagpole, it wasn't my sign, it wasn't harmony. It was power, expansion, money, control. The Attorney General's office moved faster than I expected. An investigator called me, asked for copies of everything: video documents, maps, Carl's affidavit, Melissa's memos. When I sent it, I included the fake emergency enforcement notice with Nancy's signature and that ghost inspector name. The investigator's tone stayed calm, but her words weren't. "We're opening a formal inquiry," she told me. "This is serious. And it's not the first complaint we've had about them." Not the first. That one line told me more than any threat Nancy ever made. They'd done this before. Probably to people who didn't have the money, the time, or the stomach to fight back. Meanwhile, the civil case dragged on, and Bryce was relentless in discovery. The HOA's lawyer tried delay tactics, motions, protective orders, the whole bag of tricks. Bryce answered everything, pushed harder, kept pressure on. Then we struck gold. In the subpoenaed email dump, there it was: correspondence from Nancy to her compliance team. "If he refuses visual alignment, proceed with Plan B. Surprise enforcement visit. Make it seem official. Leave no gaps in documentation, but use HOA letterhead only. We can't risk county scrutiny." They knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't confused. They weren't naive. They were careful, and that's what made it criminal. The media got louder because of course it did. And the HOA did the dumbest thing possible. They tried to delete evidence. Melissa tipped us off about an emergency board meeting where Nancy pushed to delete emails and block financial disclosures. Melissa had already printed things out. Bryce filed notice about destruction of evidence, and suddenly the HOA wasn't just in trouble. They were in the kind of trouble that follows you home. Then the sheriff showed up at my yard again, but this time it wasn't about my gate. Raines walked up with a warrant. "Not for you," he said, and I swear he looked almost happy to say it. "For evidence gathering. It's coordinated with the state." They raided the HOA's little community center office, the beige building at the front of Summit Groves. Computers, ledgers, drives, boxes of paperwork carried out like the place was a busted accountant's office, not a neighborhood clubhouse. And once that happened, the residents started waking up. People who used to glare at me through perfect hedges started waving like they'd been released from a spell. A couple of them even apologized, awkward and stiff, like they weren't used to saying the words "we were wrong." Nancy, of course, tried to turn herself into a victim. Public statements, claims of conspiracies, accusations that I was attacking her for maintaining beauty and order. Didn't matter. The evidence was too heavy. Charges were filed. Forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, felony trespass, impersonating a government official, misuse of funds, abuse of authority. Nancy was arrested at home. The footage aired. Floral robes screaming about liberty while deputies cuffed her and walked her out. I watched it once, then turned off the TV because I didn't need to celebrate on a screen. I needed my life back. The trial later on was surreal. Packed courtroom press rows, full business owners showing up just to see if the system would actually do its job for once. Nancy sat stiff in a beige blazer, jaw clenched, that old smugness gone like it had never existed. Bryce opened with the surveillance footage, her people prying my door, walking in with flashlights marking property like they were raiding a warehouse. The jury didn't blink. Carl testified, hands trembling, talking about fake violations taped to his window, months of stress, until he sold equipment just to escape. The room went silent in that heavy way, like everyone suddenly understood what small power can do when it's used like a weapon. Melissa followed, and her testimony hit like a hammer. Rigged votes, falsified documents, HOA dues funneled to cash-only contractors, fake visual improvement projects that didn't exist. Then Bryce showed server logs, deletion attempts, backdated emails, messages about destroying files after the state got involved. The judge said something that stuck with me, not because it was dramatic, but because it was so simple. You can't claim good faith, he said, while you're burning the rule book. Verdict: guilty on all counts. When the judge read the sentence, 12 years in state custody, parole eligibility, no earlier than year 8, Nancy finally moved her mouth and muttered something bitter like jealousy, like everyone was against her. But the courtroom had already moved on. The HOA was terminated by court order. A state receiver liquidated remaining assets. The community center sold. The enforcement team vanished. Residents voted to dissolve and rebuild something voluntary, something optional, something that didn't run on threats and fake seals. 2 months later, I stood on my shop roof with a decent bottle of whiskey and looked toward the edge of Summit Groves. Quiet. No patrol SUVs, no notices, no clipboard soldiers. And you know what? The neighborhood looked fine. That was the lesson for me, and it didn't hit all at once. It came later when the noise was gone and I could hear my own thoughts again. Power doesn't always show up wearing a uniform. Sometimes it shows up in a cream blazer with a smile and a packet of voluntary forms. And it counts on you being tired, busy, or polite enough to comply. The second you stop questioning it, the second you tell yourself it's easier to just go along, you're basically handing your keys to someone who has no right to hold them. Back at the yard, we upgraded locks, reinforced the side door, added cameras where there used to be blind spots. Under our shop sign, I mounted a smaller steel plate, plain words, no drama, private industrial zone. This property is not, never was, and never will be part of any HOA. Customers came back. Some joked about Summit invasions. Some just shook my hand like they were proud I didn't fold. And weirdly, it was good for business. We booked new industrial clients fast because people like doing business with someone who doesn't let bullies write the rules. Carl stopped by one afternoon with his son carrying a six-pack and a grin. He'd managed to reacquire his old lot through a county process after everything collapsed. Thought you might want to see a win, he said. And for the first time, he looked lighter, like his chest didn't hurt as much. Melissa sent a handwritten note later, simple and honest. She said she'd learned that standing still is just another way of giving permission, and she thanked me for not standing still. And me, I stopped caring about headlines. I cared about peace, steel, the steady sound of honest work. So let me ask you something, because I know you've got an opinion here. Where's the line between community standards and straight-up coercion? And what do you think someone should do when a private group starts acting like it has government power? If you've ever had an HOA, a neighbor, a landlord, anybody try to push you around with rules they didn't really have the right to enforce, tell me. Did you fight it? Did you cave? Did you find a way around it? And do you think karma actually shows up in the real world, or only when someone finally decides to push back?